Hi, I'm Dr. Emily Leeming, and this is my Saga Spaces talk.
Hello and welcome to Saga Spaces. I'm Sunita Shroff and I'm delighted to welcome you to another fascinating Saga Spaces talk. Today we're going to learn about the communication between our brains and our gut and how our microbiome influences the rest of our bodies. And to guide us through the science of the gut-brain axis is the lovely Dr. Emily Leeming. Emily holds a bachelor and a master's degree in nutrition and a PhD from King's College London, and has authored and contributed to numerous scientific papers in nutrition and lifestyle, and was previously senior nutrition scientist at the Zoe app. Now, remember, all of our talks are fully interactive, so make sure you submit your questions throughout the talk, and Emily will do her very best to answer them in the audience Q&A afterwards. Hello, Emily, and a very warm welcome to Saga Spaces. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's so great to be here.
Now, Emily, you're a registered dietitian and a scientist, but I believe you used to work as a chef on super yachts. And that sounds incredible. What was it like? And how did you go from being a chef to a scientist?
Yes, well, as you say, it was a rather unconventional start to a career in science. I had an absolute blast in my early 20s. We sailed across the world and across the Atlantic, and it was a fantastic period of time in my life, but it really kind of made it very tangible how much food is really at the center of how we interact with each other, but also our health. And I think I really felt that cooking is very much a science. So it's something that I wanted to explore further, and that's what led me to get deeper and deeper into the research. And I swapped my kitchen knives for tapping away, working with data on my computer.
And it really is so fascinating, isn't it? How our bodies are reacting to food and what we should put in and all that sort of thing. So I love anything about the microbiome. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Dr. Emily Leeming, for your Saga Spaces talk, exploring the gut-brain connection.
Thank you. Okay, so when I say bacteria and viruses, what springs to mind? Is it the global pandemic? Or perhaps it's those antibacterial adverts where you have sparkling, pristine, clean kitchens and there's not a smidge of dirt in sight. So what if I tell you that, well, some bacteria and viruses are bad? They're not all that way. So bacteria and viruses are types of microorganisms, and I'm going to call them microbes. And we're actually covered in them inside and out. So if aliens were to come down from space, they would look at us and actually think that we're half hybrid species, because we're actually half microbial cells to half human cells. So we can't even claim that we're fully human beings. And this is because bacteria were here so much far before us. We co-evolved and co-developed together, and we now work together in this lovely sharing relationship for the most part, and we very much co-evolved to exist and help each other out. So we have different microbes in our mouth, in our lungs, and all over our skin. And it's very much this evolving ecosystem. They're alive, we're sharing them back and forth, whether it's patting a dog or giving somebody a hug or touching a book, we're constantly sharing microbes back and forth. So a large number of these microbes live in our gut, and our gut is the long tube from our mouths all the way to our bum. And along this journey, we have the small intestine, which is where most of your food gets digested, and 90% of the nutrients in the food gets absorbed. After your small intestine, it goes through to your large intestine, and your large intestine is actually home to most of your gut microbiome. This is 100 trillion microbes, and that is equivalent to more than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. So it's a huge, vast number. And actually, everybody has a very unique gut microbiome. It's as unique as a fingerprint. So we actually only share about 30% of our different species. So our gut bacteria, we've always felt that perhaps they're just digesting food. And although most of the food digestion happens a little further up, when it gets to your large intestine, your gut bacteria get in the action too. So they help to break down those foods that are a little bit harder to digest before things get kind of packaged away, ready to evacuate when you go to the bathroom. But in the last 20 years or so, we've really had an absolute crescendo of research in this area. We've gone from not really knowing what this kind of mass of microbes are, and not even understanding anything about them, to understanding that actually they're more than just bit players in our digestion. They're actually linked to nearly every aspect of our health and as far-reaching as our brain. So our gut bacteria feed on certain foods that your body isn't able to easily digest. And part of this process, they then produce for us small molecules that we call metabolites. And these metabolites can travel to different organs across your body, rather like doctors and nurses travel to different countries providing aid. And they act directly on our heart, our lungs, and our brain, and are linked to lower risks of diseases like type 2 diabetes and heart disease. These microbes and the small molecules they produce interact with our cells and our organs, and they alter the way that we respond to drugs, they influence our appetite, and they influence our brain function and mood, and they perform a variety of different processes. And many of them we still don't understand, but it's a very exciting area of research where it's very fast progressing and we're starting to learn more and more. So the gut microbiome and the gut truly are drivers of health and disease. We start to think of them almost as this whole new organ that we need to look after, and we really couldn't live without them. And one way that we start to understand a bit more about this is when we look at mice who have had their microbiome removed. We see that those mice are actually really sickly and weak. They stay in the corner, they don't want to socialize or interact, and they die fairly quickly. So it's really bringing us to understand that actually our microbiome is so important and we couldn't live without it. What is a healthy microbiome? That's a question that we're still trying to understand and break down as scientists. But what we do think is it's rather like having a healthy rainforest. So a rainforest has many different species of plants and they all live together. And some of them work together to help each other out and some of them competitive against each other. So we don't want to have one certain plant come and dominate the entire rainforest to the detriment of everyone else. And it's very much the same with our gut microbiome. We have this variety of different bacteria that all work together in a competitive way. And we want to have lots of different types of bacteria, particularly as well as because they all do certain different things. They all produce certain types of metabolites that have different effects for our health. So what I particularly want to focus on today is that powerful connection between your gut, your microbiome, and your brain. Now, your brain is the CEO of your body, and it tells you what to do. However, I bet you didn't know that 90% of the communication between your gut and your brain is actually your gut talking to your brain and not the other way around. It's a very chatty organ. You think of it like it's WhatsApping you multiple messages every single millisecond of the day. So the gut and the brain form one of your body's most powerful relationships affecting your health and your risk of disease, but it also affects how good you feel day to day because we're starting to understand how it potentially influences how your brain functions and also your moods and emotions. But I think you perhaps might already know of this, but we might not have necessarily fully realized it because in our day-to-day language, we talk about having gut feelings, about listening to our gut instinct, about having butterflies in our stomach when we're nervous, and also about our friend perhaps being gutsy. So that's something that we're thinking about in our day-to-day language, and we're constantly communicating about this, but now we're understanding how this is actually really a process that is very much rooted in our health and also in disease as well. So our gut and our brain are anatomically linked. From a tiny embryo, your gut and your brain developed and grew from the very same tissue. And actually, similar to your brain, your gut has about 100 million neurons. And these are nerve cells that act like messengers all over your body that in your brain allow you to do everything from breathing, talking, eating, walking, and thinking. But in your gut, it's very much helping you with that digestion, helping to push things through and giving different signals to different parts of your body to help coordinate your whole digestion. So your gut is effectively a brain into itself, and it's often referred to as the second brain. So the gut and the brain is connected by the vagus nerve. It is the longest of your brain's nerves and the communication highway between these two organs. So the party really does happen in Vegas. I'm sorry, I had to make that joke. There are actually two nerves. There's the left one that goes down the left side of your neck and the right one that goes down the right. And extends all the way down, branching multiple times like tendril-like nerves that reach to your other organs, like connecting roads to other cities and towns. So it weaves past your heart and your lungs to reach and connect with your brain and your intestines. And the way that I like to think about it is that your brain and your gut are twin cities that never sleep. So you have cars and trucks and motorbikes traveling back and forth between the two, carrying supplies, information, and trade, and both rely on each other to thrive. Now, our gut bacteria don't miss out on the action. They can send messages up our vagus nerve to our brain. And also the other influence that they have is that they both, together with the brain, produce and respond to the same neurochemicals. So these neurochemicals help us to manage our appetite as well as our emotions. Now, the gut-brain connection helps to regulate your immune system as well, and in that turn, also inflammation. And actually 70% of your immune system lives in your gut. Now, your gut bacteria are nestled in the duvet of your mucus lining, your intestines. It's this soft, squishy mass. And therefore, they're in direct contact with your immune cells and your nerve cells, which are embedded in your lining. So these nerve and immune cells act rather like spy cameras. They're always on the lookout for trouble. They're scanning and reporting back to the command centers of the brain if they see anything suspicious. And our gut bacteria all act like informers on this spy system. They tap into this communication network to our brain as well. So how are our gut bacteria involved in our mental health conditions and also with brain diseases? And can looking after our gut bacteria help us to decrease our disease risk? So in mood disorders like depression, we see that people have very different microbiome compositions. They tend to have less microbial diversity and they tend to have more pro-inflammatory bacteria. And we're starting to get an inkling of how a microbiome might be involved, firstly by looking at mice. So what we see is, for a particular study, they looked at humans who had depression. And what they did something called a fecal microbiota transplant. And in plain English, that's literally taking somebody's poo from something. And what they did is transplanted that poo back into a mice's intestines. And that is where your microbiome then gets transferred. What they saw with these mice is that they saw that they then had depressive-like symptoms, very typical and very similar to what the humans had shown. So we saw that even by just this simple extraction of someone's microbiome, moving it into a mice, we saw this transference of depressive symptoms. And we also see this through certain types of probiotics. Now, probiotics are types of bacteria that have been known to exert a specific health benefit. And so when we talk about probiotics that are involved with mood, we call them psychobiotics. And what we see is that mice that have been given these psychobiotics can tend to either become more anxious, so they're the bad kind, or they can become much less anxious and less stressed and much calmer and more interactive with different mice than if the mice that weren't taking them. So we're still at this early stage of our microbiome and trying to understand what our microbiome does in terms of our mood in human beings. But one study I really want to highlight, which didn't look at the microbiome, because unfortunately, running studies is incredibly expensive, and particularly sequencing at this point in time somebody's microbiome is a very costly expense in terms of research. So this was a study run back in 2017 that was run on the cost of an oily rag. And they were researchers in Australia, and it was the first randomized control trial that really wanted to understand what the effect of food was on mood. So what they did is they collected over 60 different people with moderate to severe depression, and they had poor diet quality. And over 12 weeks, there were two different groups. One group was given the Mediterranean dietary pattern and guided to improve their diet. And the other group was given social support only. So they just had kind of friendly meetings to chat about video games or walking outside or their favorite hobbies. What they saw after the 12 weeks was shocking for the researchers. They were so flabbergasted, they had to go back and look at the data again. And what they found was that 30% of the people in the dietary change group actually didn't meet the criteria for depression anymore. So that's 30% of the group. So it really highlighted that food can have this powerful effect on our mood. And the researchers really felt that the microbiome also was playing a role in that. So recently, many studies have shown that the changes in our gut microbiome directly influences cognitive decline and actively participates in dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So those with dementia and Alzheimer's have been found to have more pro-inflammatory bacteria and also reduced microbial diversity. And this inflammation response, we know that chronic inflammation contributes to the development of these diseases. The research really does point to the possibility that there are specific bacteria within the gut microbiome that could increase the risk of developing Alzheimer's. Now, there's a wide imbalance of gut bacteria also found in Parkinson's disease. And Parkinson's disease is a very interesting one that we're starting to really understand that there's perhaps this very strong gut-brain connection. So there are certain risk factors like constipation are risk factors for getting Parkinson's disease. But also having Parkinson's disease is also linked with gut symptoms too. So you could also then get constipation or perhaps impaired gut barrier function. So really showing that there is this connection between the brain and the gut talking to each other in this disease. So what do we do about this? What can we do to help support our gut microbiome? So our gut microbiome is changing constantly. It's very rapidly evolving. It's rather like the sea. It's kind of ebbing in and out with the tide. However, with this is that there is still some kind of constancy to it. So although there are some top level species that rapidly change and evolve, our key cornerstone species tend to be quite resilient and kind of embedded and kind of quite resistant to change. And this is for our benefit in so many ways, because if we get food poisoning, for example, or we take a dose of antibiotics, we're more likely to be able to bounce back. But it does mean that it perhaps takes us a little bit longer than a couple of days and more like weeks and months to make substantial long-term changes to our gut microbiome. However, that is one of those things that we know with health and lifestyle, that it's really about making small, achievable actions that we can really do over time to really help us to live our best life in the best way possible. So there are many factors that influence our gut microbiome. Some things we don't have much control over, for example, whether we're breastfed as a child or where we live, for example, with differences in microbiomes seen between people who live in the countryside versus in an urban city environment. But there are things that we can change that do influence our gut microbiome, and diet is the largest modifiable contributor to our gut microbiome. So there are two certain types of dietary patterns that I want to talk about before we zoom in on the details. So the first one is a Western diet that we typically eat in the UK, and this tends to be rather high in ultra-processed foods that tend to be high in salt and high in sugar and high in fat, and we're having a very low intake of fruits and vegetables. And what we see is that we're getting a less diverse microbiome from eating our foods in this way over a long period of time. We're getting more of those pro-inflammatory bacteria, which are potentially linked to disease. Conversely, if we flip the switch and we move more towards a Mediterranean diet pattern, Mediterranean diet being rich in fruits and vegetables, nut seeds, beans and legumes, herbs and spices, extra virgin olive oil, and also a lot of fish as well. This dietary pattern is thought to really contain so many different components that help our gut bacteria to thrive. So the 5 key dietary factors that I really want to share with you today for your gut microbiome, I like to talk about them as the 3 Fs and the 2 Ps. So I talk about fiber, ferments, fish, polyphenols, and something I call press pause. So with fiber is something that is so much more than just that thing that helps us to go, as we used to think about it. It's had this bad rap where it's kind of thought as being a bit kind of dull, but actually it's really the epicenter for what we need to be talking about when it comes to gut health. Fiber is from the plant roughage from plant foods. So those fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds that I mentioned earlier. And what they do, the gut microbiome, they feed on fiber. When you eat fiber, it's kind of like giving your gut bacteria a complete party. You know, you're putting out the smoke screens, you're putting on the disco lights. The gut bacteria absolutely love it. And what they do is they break down and metabolize your fiber, and they produce special types of metabolites called short-chain fatty acids. Now, these metabolites, these short-chain fatty acids, are what we get most excited by. They're ones that we really understand a bit more about how they influence your brain by crossing the gut-brain barrier, how they help support the integrity of the gut-brain barrier, and how they influence all other areas of your body as well. Now, fiber in the UK, we're sadly lacking how much we're having of it. So on average, we're only having about 16 to 18 grams of fiber a day, yet the target is at least 30 grams of fiber. And not having enough fiber is likely perhaps starving our gut bacteria. It's likely we're not giving them enough fiber to be able to do their job properly to help with our health. And actually, even just small changes and small steps of small increases in fiber, such as increasing an extra 7 grams of fiber into your diet, is linked to 6 to 7% less risk of heart disease, of stroke, and of type 2 diabetes. So what can you do in terms of increasing your fiber intake? So I've got some quick, easy, simple swaps, which I hope you'll be able to try at home. So my first big one, probably the biggest one that I just think if you can do anything on this, is try and make half your plate full of vegetables. So this is something when we can look at our plate and we think, okay, great, I've done it, half. And you're most likely to be able to meet your fiber intake that way. The other tip I can give you is to swap your white flour, pasta and rice for brown. Now this contains more fiber because it contains more of the whole of the grain. Likewise, in terms of trying to keep all the intactness of the plant, is trying to keep the skin on. So a lot of the skins in, for example, kiwis and potatoes, if you think about root vegetables like carrots and parsnips, they also contain fiber too, and they can be equally delicious if we're roasting them. And lastly, it'd be remiss of me not to mention beans. Beans are my unsung superheroes. They are higher in fiber than most fruits and vegetables, and actually even just half a can of baked beans contains that magical 7 grams of fiber. So fiber isn't actually just one thing. There are actually lots of different types of fiber. And our gut bacteria actually like to eat different types of fiber. So similar to how I might like mushrooms, you actually might not like them. So our bacteria are also quite particular in that way too. So we really want to be able to give this diversity of different plants that contain different types of fibers. So we make sure that our gut bacteria are all getting the type of food that they want. Likewise, they don't only eat fiber, they also eat something called polyphenols. Now, polyphenols are this group of antioxidants that are present in fruits and vegetables. And what they do is, very excitingly, they actually put the color and they bring the color from all these different the rainbow of fruits and vegetables that we have. So the polyphenols give color they give the green to the courgettes, they give the red to the tomatoes. So it really brings to light that kind of old saying of eat the rainbow is very much really pertinent for gut health as well. So This plant diversity is linked to our microbes being more diverse. And the key things that we can do for this is really to, I like to say, to choose those pre-mixed bags at the supermarket. So you can get those pre-mixed vegetables, you can get those pre-mixed bags of salad. I love those tins of beans that already have a medley in them. So it's a really quick, easy way to think about, okay, I'm just going to add that without adding any extra hardship. The other thing that I like to do is to have mixed nuts and seeds. So these I'll sprinkle on in the morning onto my breakfast, or I'll have them next to the kettle. So if I ever want to have a snack. Likewise, when you go to the supermarket and you're doing your weekly shop, it can be really great to pick something completely different that you don't normally have. And that can be something that you can make into a brand new dish that maybe you haven't tried before. So the second F is fish. Now, 60% of our brain is made from fat, and about a third of this is a type of omega-3 fatty acid called DHA. And unfortunately, our body isn't able to produce this, and actually most of it comes from fish. Now, there are three main types of omega-3 fatty acids. We get EPA and DHA, which come from fatty fishes like salmon, mackerel, sardines, and also algae. And then we get another type of fatty acid called ALA. And this is a plant-sourced omega-3 that we get from flax seeds and walnuts and linseeds. It's very difficult for our body to either convert one type to another or even to just get enough of it. So we really have to make sure that we get this from our diet. And omega-3s are really the most crucial and essential molecules that determine your brain's cognitive performance throughout all stages of life. And they also feed our gut bacteria too. So there's this connection between the two. Fish intake, for example, in pregnant mums have been shown to predict their child's neuropsychological function at the age of 5 years old. Yet in the UK, we have some of the lowest levels of omega-3 fatty acids in our blood. So how much omega-3s do we need? Really, we're looking at those 2 portions of fish a week, one of which should be an oily fish. And if you don't eat fish, then don't worry too much. You could take an omega-3 supplement. For vegans and vegetarians, an algae source of omega-3 is actually just as good as a fish oil source. So we've covered fiber and fish and polyphenols, and our third F is for ferments, specifically live ferments. So the type that you find in the refrigerated section. So fermented foods are foods that have been acted upon by safe bacteria, safe friendly bacteria and yeasts. And I think it's almost like this culinary science experiment. If you've ever seen anyone making sourdough, for example, you see that the dough starts bubbling, or you see a kimchi or a kraut in a jar and it needs to be burped because of the amount of gas that needs to kind of come out from the bacteria's action. So it's really not the kind of bacteria that causes food to go off. I'm not talking about the bacteria that causes, your kind of bit of cucumber in the back of your fridge to kind of grow some furry mold. That's not the bacteria that we want. It's really this using and harnessing this specific type of bacteria in a way that we've used historically for years. We've used it as a way to preserve our food, and it's a technique that very much predates fridges. One of the oldest ferments on record is actually fish sauce made from anchovies. Rome used to use it as a kind of ketchup. And actually you can ferment practically any food. And we're very familiar with lots of different fermented foods. We just perhaps don't recognize it so much. So wine, for example, is fermented. Many of the cheeses that we eat still contain some live bacteria if it hasn't been pasteurized. And also bread is a type of fermentation as well. So fermented foods fall into 2 main groups. There are fermented foods that are alive and those that still contain that bacteria and those microbes that have helped produce them. Or we have the fermented foods where the bacteria and the yeasts have died, and this is usually by heat from cooking. So we think about sourdough, all those bacteria actually die because of the cooking process. So it's alive ferments like yogurt, kefir, kimchi, and blue cheese and cottage cheese that we get particularly excited about. Because the bacteria that do the fermentation, they're still alive and present, which means that likely when we eat them, we're getting this extra dose of microbes into our gut. And one of the Stanford University studies found that eating 6 or more servings of fermented foods was linked to higher microbial diversity and less inflammation. So I know that 6 servings sounds quite intimidating, but actually just getting a little bit in to start with and being curious and having fun with fermented foods can be a really great way to start. And don't forget that fermented foods also include things that we're very familiar with, like yogurt and cottage cheese, and also blue cheeses. So our last P is press pause. So this is actually also called time-restricted eating. It's a type of intermittent fasting, but it's actually a bit more of a fun and easier type to do. So what we talk about time-restricted eating is actually the time between we first eat something in the morning and the last mouthful that you eat in the day. So it's that time between I've had my eggs and my sourdough toast in the morning, all the way through to the last thing I ate for dinner. So eating with an 8 to 10 hour time frame is thought to be the best for our health. And this could be as simple as having your dinner a little bit earlier, so to shorten that time. And what this does is it gives our body time to move into this rest and digest mode. And your gut bacteria can then sweep in and help to clean up that mucus layer and put everything into order, very much like tidying up your house at the end of the day. So time-restricted eating increases microbial diversity, and it's also linked to better blood pressure, insulin sensitivity, and less oxidative stress. And actually, one study also found that participants felt less angry and less tired during the day, and I have to say, who doesn't want that? So we've now had 3 Fs and 2 Ps. So we've had fiber, ferments, fish, polyphenols, and press pause. So if you follow these principles and you can help your gut microbiome be the best support for your brain health, but also your overall well-being and also lowering your risk of many diseases. So your gut microbiome is truly the cornerstone of health, and we're only just fully beginning to understand how powerful it is.
Emily, thank you so much for your fascinating talk today. And thanks to you, our audience, not just for taking part, but for watching. I do hope you'll join us again soon for another Saga Spaces talk. Until then, bye-bye for now.